Hello, and welcome to a special Mindrolling Anthology. My name is Noah Marcus. I am Raghu's son, and I will be your host today. Raghu is still recovering from his ride on the road to enlightenment, but he'll be back at it soon enough. Today's episode is a collection of clips from Raghu's conversations with some of the leading figures in the world of psychedelics. First clip comes from episode 348 with Rick Doblin. Rick is he's one of the leaders of the current psychedelic renaissance that we've been undergoing. He and Raghu discuss grief, PTSD, and the role of psychedelics in trauma processing. The next clip comes from episode 497 with Dr. Sylvestre Quevedo, a psychedelic researcher who has practiced medicine for over 40 years. He and Raghu explore how ketamine fits into the sort of bigger picture of psychedelics, and they share stories of their own experiences with and around ketamine. The third clip comes from episode 505 with Paul Austin, who is an entrepreneur, author, and coach. He and Raghu talk about how psychedelics can sort of help us remember who we truly are and the potential that they hold for helping to heal relationships. Raghu shares a cool story about his father taking LSD in India. It's my grandpappy. Next up, we have a clip from episode 563 with neuropharmacologist Stephanie Carzon-Abrams. She and Raghu discuss bridging the gap between science and spirit and how psychedelics can really help change our perspectives. The final clip comes from episode 596. Raghu and neuroscientist Gül Dölen talk about how psychedelics can help induce meta-plasticity and why the quote-unquote critical periods that happen after psychedelic therapies share some similarities with the Buddhist concept of beginner's mind. All right, that is it from me. I hope everybody really enjoys this episode. And like I said, Raghu will be back with you soon. Have a great day.
You know, we've talked before, and I think I'm pretty well informed around the work that you've done and the work that you are doing and where this is going. And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I came across what I would call a real world story, which is I have a family member who had some friends, and they lost a young couple, I guess in their mid-30s or something. They lost a child, maybe just a few years old, but old enough, obviously it was an extraordinarily traumatic experience. Tremendous depression set in. And he said they called him because he was very friendly with them and he had some ideas about advisal for them in terms of how they could come out of this period in their lives. And it ended up that he had done some work with psychedelics, with mushrooms, working with a therapist over some other issues that he had. So it was very successful for him. And he recommended this. And the father of the child, because apparently at some point the mother got pregnant again, the father of the child went through this regime with a therapist. This was in Canada, where I think it's a lot more open than it is here in the States, being able to do such a thing.
It's not more legal, but it's just not as hunted down. It's not as,
right.
high pressure.
Right. Anyhow, so this person went through this, the father of the lost child, and my cousin said to me, "You cannot believe the transformation that this person in one session what he went through was nigh on miraculous in terms of him coming out of the darkest of places. And that not only did he come out of this dark place, but he also got in touch with the ineffable. a divine presence experience, the stuff that we all did back in the late 60s, early 70s, that just turned us on in a way that we had never experienced, the vast interconnectivity of everything, and the kind of presence that comes to the surface with psilocybin in particular. And he just went on about it, and the way in which these people's lives were turned around, just extraordinary, And I know you see this all the time. This is just part of the work. But when, it hits home when you have somebody in your family, that is relaying something like this, the efficacy of it is extraordinary.
Yeah, I'm so glad you shared that, Raghu, because, there's been discussions about whether prolonged grief is a form of PTSD. And the conclusion of some of the experts in the whole field of PTSD research is that it is. And so you end up getting in these sort of patterns of response, of emotional response, that are difficult for people to get out of. And psychedelics have this just incredible ability to break these kind of patterns and bring new emotions. And then also this idea of being connected to the ineffable, to the spiritual. You have a different perspective on death, and you're able to celebrate life and move on. So it's a wonderful story. And I think the sadness, the flip side of that is just think about all these people now that are healthcare workers that are seeing all sorts of people die because of COVID, and the many healthcare workers are at risk, and how are we going to help them? And all of this. So there's an enormous amount of grief that's going to be needing to be processed. And the sadness for me is that it's going to take us a while to work through the system to make these things available in above ground ways that are covered by insurance.
Yeah. And we're talking about MDMA is the central psychedelic that you use in these experiments. Yeah. And you've talked about how it really helps to process trauma. Mm-hmm. And it includes memory enhancement. Can you talk about that? Memory enhancement and trauma memory, and the changing the reaction and the story that we tell ourselves.
So when experiences happen that are emotionally painful and challenging, and they're difficult for people to process, what happens a lot of times is that people push them out of their memory, that they don't want to think about them. And the problem with PTSD is that these traumatic experiences are never really fully pushed out of awareness. When they're unconscious, they're affecting you and your whole sense of the world. But also for PTSD, they come in nightmares. They come in memories during the day that are triggered by different reminders of the event. They are associated with all sorts of emotional numbing or hypervigilance. So what MDMA does is it reduces the activity in the amygdala, the fear processing part of the brain. Forgetting about neuroscience, what it does is it helps people deal with more difficult emotions, that they're not as painful. They can look at them without being overwhelmed. And so what we see is that it actually enhances people's memory of trauma, that people have repressed a lot of the memories of. So one of the examples is a firefighter who was in our study, and he and a bunch of his fellows had gone into a burning building, and the roof collapsed, and about 8 of the people were killed. And it was a big tragedy in firefighters, and he ended up having PTSD and unable to work and disabled with PTSD. And so under the influence of MDMA, what he said was he thought he remembered what happened, but there was a whole big section of the worst part that he had blocked out of his conscious awareness completely. And under the influence of MDMA, it came to the surface. So that's the part about memory enhancement, is that it's, now you could make some statements like, is it real memory? Is it symbolic? Is it accurate? And those are sometimes hard to prove one way or another. But for us, the question is, are they therapeutic? And so what we find, it's a process called fear extinction and memory reconsolidation. So that the old view of memory was that you have a memory, it's stored in your brain. When you remember it, it's like taking a book off the shelf, and then you read the book, and then you put the book back. And what's actually the case is that the memories are stored, like there's an episodic memory, there's the emotional memory connected to it, there's smells and sounds that are connected to it. So when you remember something, it sort of comes together from different parts of your brain. And if it's a painful memory, or even if it's a normal memory, when you have just remembered it, you actually have to like reprint the book to reconsolidate the memory. And that explains how over time, Tim Leary's memory over the results of the Concord prison experiment, or how memories change over time.
Yeah.
So to look at a painful memory from a position of safety, which is what the MDMA gives you, and then you're able to process it to put it into long-term storage. So MDMA also increases connectivity between the hypothalamus and the amygdala, so that you can move memories that seem like they're always about to happen or always happening, as post-traumatic is never really post. It's always about to happen. So you can process the memory into long-term storage, and then you reconsolidate the memory. And when you put it together again in this distributed memory in the brain, you've basically swapped out the original emotion of fear and terror with the new emotion of it's in the past, I've dealt with it, I've survived. And so then when you remember it later, you have this memory enhancement for what actually happened, but the painful emotions connected to it have been replaced by a sense that that's my story, I've integrated, I've accepted. There's even measures that we use that are called post-traumatic growth inventory. So how you grow from trauma. Trauma can often be completely disabling, but when it's handled well, you can actually enhance your life because it causes you to question, what is the purpose of life? What are you trying to do? What is your priorities? And so you can end up having post-traumatic growth. And so we see that in a lot of the subjects. And so I think this idea of memory enhancement for the trauma, and then also this processing, fear extinction, and memory reconsolidation are a good way to understand how MDMA works.
What about, that's what I was going to ask, ketamine? How does that fit in? Because I mean, again, now, back in the day, let's see, we were, what was it called? Horse tranquilizer? What do they call that? That's basically what we're talking about, right? And let me tell you that one day in India, we were meditating in the high Himalaya. This is a fun story, everybody. And with Ram Dass, we were at a Gandhi ashram right in front of us, like 75 miles as the crow flies, the full range of the Himalayas in that area, with the centerpiece being this peak called Trishul, which is sacred to Shiva. It had the formation of the three-pronged peaks.
Wow.
Anyhow, we were in ecstasy, and Maharaji was, about a couple hours away by car, and he was happy we were all stuck up there, not bothering him, I think. So he had told, one person had asked Maharaji, can I do this drug, which was basically it's ketamine. And Maharaji said, yeah, okay, as long as, you're alone and, you're up in the Himalayas, so it's cool and all that stuff. Anyhow, he got Ram Dass to do it one day. Ram Dass was going to try. I think Ram Dass probably had done it before. I can't imagine, because we all did it at that time. It just completely slams all the perceptive doors shut, and you are released. I mean, it's an extraordinary drug. Anyhow, I was in a room above the room where he was taking this dose of ketamine downstairs from me, and suddenly I start hearing this eerie kind of thing coming from a human being, noises that I really had never heard before. It was that far out. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I looked, and on my floor there was a hole in my floor it was India, so the construction wasn't very good. Anyhow, I was able to look down and I saw Ram Dass. He was sailing around. He looked like he was the Silver Surfer and making these extraordinary sounds. And so everybody heard. So we one by one went into the room. I swear to God, this is true. It sounds outrageous. And we all put a hand on, his foot, his arm, his leg, whatever. Everybody had a hand. You're talking about 20 people or something, 15, 20 people. And we all, let me tell you, Silver, we were gone for about a week. I mean, just through that, of course, we had Maharaji and everything else going on, right? More to the point. But we would just, we were silent and we were like eating, and then everybody would just erupt in laughter, looking at each other because we couldn't tell where each of us began and each of us ended.
Wow.
It was an extraordinary experience.
And
Ram Dass's thing.
And continued for a week?
Yeah. I mean, I may be exaggerating, but I remember going to next days eating because we'd all eat together. And I remember that feeling like we were, we had gone beyond the limitations that we were normally used to being a human in a body. It was
wow.
Yeah. So, so ketamine seems to work too. I don't know.
It's fascinating what you just said. Yeah. So ketamine has been around for a long time. It's a whole story. There's a whole kind of rebirth of ketamine therapy occurring right now, and certainly in the media, and people have heard about it. So we can talk for a minute about it. It's a fascinating story that you gave. Ketamine's been around for a long time now, probably more than 30 years. It's used quite commonly in hospitals for conscious sedation and as an adjunct to anesthesia, because it's a so-called dissociative anesthetic. In other words, it dissociates your sort of higher cortical process from the rest of your body. So people commonly have out-of-body experiences, which is fascinating by itself. And it's a favorite in pediatrics because you can really do surgical stuff like take care of wounds and all that in patients that you can't use other drugs for. Burn victims, for example, that are young have small trachea and a lot of laryngeal edema and tracheal edema, and it's hard to intubate them. So pediatricians will often use them to dress wounds in a child, and that sort of use something like ketamine. So it's very safe. It's well known in hospitals. And interestingly, it's kind of being rediscovered as a type. It's not a true psychedelic in the sense that tryptamine is a different chemical category, different neurotransmitter system, but it's actually known to produce altered state experiences, including some are empathogenic at lower doses, some are clear out-of-body experiences, and some have some visuals, although not as much as with LSD or psilocybin, the tryptamines. It's in the category. It's related to phencyclidine, PCP, and people remember that. It is used in veterinary medicine as an anesthetic, hence the idea of horse tranquilizer. Someone from another country who was raised with horses was in a group that I was with, and they said, it was used as a horse tranquilizer, and they said, that's a horrible thing to say. Horses are so sensitive. How could this be? Anyway, so ketamine's been around, and it was actually, it has a sort of reputation in the psychedelic counterculture as well from the 60s, because it was used by some psychiatrists as a psychedelic agent. Salvador Roquette, notably in Mexico. Anyway, it's back on the scene. It's very safe. And when used in lower doses, it does induce an altered state experience that can be used in the same way that other psychedelics are used in therapy. When I was at Stanford, this would have been in the early 80s, I had a friend who was working in pediatric anesthesia, and they were doing research on ketamine, and they had been giving large bolus doses to children, and the children were sort of going out, and the parents were sort of worried about the whole thing, so they were experimenting with a new delivery regimen, which was a smaller loading dose and a continuous infusion. So he called me and he said, would you like to be a normal subject in an intravenous ketamine infusion trial? And I said, Yeah, it sounds interesting. So, so they hooked me up to an IV ketamine drip for 3 hours, and I'll tell you I still remember this vividly, and it was easily 20, more than like 30 years ago. I mean, it was a long time ago, and he's turns on the IV infusion. He's dictating into dictaphone, checking my blood pressure and all this, and he ramps it up a little bit. And I say, I'm feeling fine. I feel a little this and that. And then the next thing I know, I'm in the top corner of the room, and I'm and I'm looking at him, my friend, playing with the IV, and I'm looking at myself. And I said, wow, if I'm up here, who is that down there? Yeah. And I had this epiphany with that, you know, consciousness survives bodily death, and I don't need a body in order to be conscious, because I'm seeing this and I have no body, and on and on. So yeah, a very powerful.
That's Ram Dass's, first trip, psilocybin trip, right?
Really?
You never heard that story?
I don't know that story. I don't know that.
God. I mean, know that. Okay, well, you'll have to refer to the Be Here Now network and go to a podcast where he describes it in the early days. But basically, it's the same thing. Next thing he knew, he's on the ceiling, looking down at his body and going, "What the heck is that?"
Really?
Like that? You just described exactly how he described. I mean, he goes into great detail. It's worth listening to. But yeah, that's amazing.
Fascinating.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Part of that is my own personal experiences. The most profound experiences that I had at a young age were on higher doses of LSD in nature, in the woods, outside with small groups of friends. Right. So there was definitely an element of my own personal experiences have been so influential in terms of how I move in the world and why I love it. And that's because I tend to be a more melancholic person. And so LSD is a more uplifting. It's an antidepressant in many ways. It has this, sense of bliss that comes from it. And that's because LSD is more dopaminergic. There's more dopamine with LSD than something with psilocybin. I think another reason I focus so much on LSD was because it's the most controversial, right? It has the most stigma associated with it. And so if we can get culture to reframe the relationship with LSD, then things like psilocybin, ayahuasca, wachuma, that's no problem, because LSD is really the one that holds the most cultural baggage and that holds the most stigma. So it's like, it's like, take on the biggest one first, go for that, and then help to reframe it by educating people that you don't need to do a thumbprint of LSD in order to benefit from it. You can just take a tiny, tiny dose that's barely perceptible. And so it just flips the perception totally on its head. And then I think the other element for me has been the audience that I'm speaking to and that I really want to communicate to are entrepreneurs, high performers, creatives. And I find generally that psilocybin, now ayahuasca is interesting, and that I feel like it's a whole nother thing. So psilocybin versus LSD, just to keep it a little contained now, psilocybin is more serotonergic. There's more serotonin. So serotonin is tied to contentment. And I find that a lot of people who are doing inner work, trauma healing, healing aspects of their body and their past, psilocybin can be really, really good for that. But for those who are really looking for like cognitive improvement, that are looking for creativity, that are looking to access flow a little bit more easy, I find LSD to be a better tool specifically for that. And so since I'm speaking to that audience, I'm speaking to a lot of people, but I love that audience in particular. It felt like LSD was a good neurochemical key for precisely what it is that they were interested in. And it also, just to come back to the point that I was making before, it has the most lineage for us as a Western people, right? Psilocybin is historically with the Mazatec. I mean, it's all over the place. As you mentioned, Paul Stamets in Egypt, but the Mazatec are known. Ayahuasca is very South American. Wachuma is very South American. Peyote is from the native people here in the United States. Iboga is Gabon. But LSD, there's a particular relationship that we as a Western culture have. And it's so sad and unfortunate that it became tainted in the 60s, largely because of misunderstandings. And so I think healing that relationship with a medicine that we've known for for 5,000 years as a Western people is going to help relieve this amnesia that we struggle with. Because I think a lot of our challenges, it is this sense we've forgotten. We've forgotten who we are. We've forgotten where we come from. We've forgotten why we are here. And what often psychedelics do is they help us to remember that. And that, as Raghu was saying, that it can be the opening on the path. It was for Ram Dass. It was for Jack Kornfield. It was for Timothy Leary. It was for so many people. And as we all know, right, it's one thing to see the mountaintop. It's another thing to every day walk towards that mountaintop. And that's where, of course, meditation and breath work and yoga and all these other practices are just as, if not more important, as psychedelics, as ayahuasca, wachuma, mushrooms.
And I want to talk more about that in terms of this is something Gagan and I have been working on behalf of Love Serve Remember Foundation in terms of representing, like we did at MAPS, we did a couple of different presentations. They were not about anything whatsoever to do with therapy, PTSD, and how it, which was the centerpiece, of course, of what MAPS is doing. It was more about how to represent what Ram Dass, how he used to frame it. And basically that was our connectivity back then. But you just triggered something in me when you said healing relationships, basically, this in a few less words. I had an experience that, I've told this many times on the podcast, but since this is new probably to you, it'd be interesting. When I went to India, and of course I was with Neem Karoli Baba, and then my father wrote and said, I want to come over. I'd written him, you can't believe what's happening to us. And he came over to India, which blew my mind because I had a horrible relationship with him. We fought all the time. I knew there was love, but basically we just did not get along. Anyhow, the bottom line is, after some time, Neem Karoli Baba looked at me and said, did you give your father the medicine? I said, yeah. He had a cold. I gave him some aspirin. He said, the yogi medicine Ram Dass gave me? I went, acid? And my father went, LSD? And he said, take care of your father while he's in India and meet me in a couple of weeks in this other city. And we went to Benares, which is a city in India where people have been going to die for thousands and thousands of years on the banks of the Ganges River. And we were in a houseboat right downstream from there. And a friend of mine gave me a hit of acid. He actually took it. And because he was a World War II bomber pilot, most of his squadron died. He was so PTSD'd, it wasn't funny. I mean, and of course, I was a bit of the recipient of this in my earlier days. Anyhow, he took and had a death trip from one end to the other. People dead in the streets, putting money to give him enough wood, and animal. I mean, it was just incredible. We came again to see Neem Karoli Baba, who never said a word about it because there was no rational kind of stuff going on, but told him a whole thing about that nobody else could know about a horse farm and a horse that he saved in Canada. And from that point on, we had a relationship. Previous to that, we didn't. So I am living proof of the healing capacity of this incredible substance. But now we have to get into, of course, talk about having someone there to be there for whatever it was that we needed. Me as an individual, I didn't take any in that moment. And my father, of course, we had this extraordinary being. But, there's a lot of trust. I just want to say, so people hear this kind of thing, especially this story of, I can't tell you how many people, I wish my father would take some acid. Boy, we could get along. Well, it ain't that easy. And what it takes is, first of all, having yourself straightened out a little bit. And that has to happen and if you're using entheogens, if you're using acid or psilocybin or MDMA, whatever it is, have a trusted friend as part of this situation. Please, don't even think about it unless that's existent. Yeah, so, I had that in particular experience, which changed my life.
And even a trusted friend is great. A trip sitter, someone who you know, someone who maybe you've known for some time. There are a lot of trained and certified therapists, practitioners, coaches, and I think another interesting dynamic that's arisen in this third wave of psychedelics is, do you have to be a psychotherapist in order to guide someone into their deepest sense of being? And there are a lot of indigenous facilitators and practitioners who have no such credentials and yet have been doing this, and their parents and their parents' parents and their parents' parents' parents have been doing this for a very long time. And I think what you've hit on, Raghu, is important. We don't necessarily need doctors and psychiatrists and clinical therapists and psychologists. They're helpful. Absolutely, they're helpful. But really what psychedelics are teaching us is the importance of presence, how to listen, how to slow down, right? They're helping to sort of take us out of this rigmarole, this hamster wheel of existence, and see that another way of being is actually possible. And really what's required more than anything is just a loving, compassionate presence.
Yeah, absolutely. 1,000,000,000%.
I'll first say that my work tends to be focused on the above ground, on the science, on the medicine. But that's just the work that I contribute to. My mission is to bridge science and spirit. That's my ultimate mission. I say, normalize talking about past lives with your fellow neurologist. It's bringing these types of conversations into the medical meeting, the scientific meeting, explaining to providers that have practiced in this very focused way.
Narrow.
Narrow is the word that I wanted to use. To treat the whole human. Why only treat the symptom when you have an entire human being here? And coming to the realization that anybody who has any kind of health challenge will have their mental health affected. There is an impact. And so just treating that illness or that symptom is not enough. You need to heal the mind. You need to heal the soul. They're all interconnected. And there's no reason why medical science, especially when we talk about psychedelics, can't address all of that. And so for me, like that's the ultimate goal. If I can use research as a tool to achieve this, then I've succeeded, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And when you talked about the power of integration, I think the whole point of a psychedelic experience is to change your life. Doesn't mean that it has to be a massive change, doesn't mean you have to crack your entire world open, but it is about change. And so whether you are engaging in small, modest doses, or whether you're doing it every single day in a room over and over and over again.
Don't necessarily try that, by the way. That's a story. It's real, but it's from a very special group of people.
Yeah. It's about change because why else are you doing it? I'm not saying that you're trying to change who you are, but coming out of a psychedelic experience, you are changed, even if it is on a micro level.
Perspective changes on a major level.
Yes, definitely.
Absolutely.
There are insights everywhere. There is something to integrate. There is an intention every single time, even on the dance floor. I always say that. Even if you are participating more recreationally and you just want to have a good time and you just want to relax, there's something to prepare for. There's something to integrate every single time. And I think overall, everybody is always seeking betterment. Be a better person, be a kinder person, have more compassion, understand yourself, accept yourself, love yourself, so that you could understand, accept, and love others. Um,
Yeah.
and this is, I guess, the message. And if I can communicate the message through research papers, then great. If I can communicate it on a stage at a conference or in a workshop, great. I recently started a consultancy that does both strategy and science research solutions for initiatives in the plant medicine and psychedelic space. So from nonprofits to clinics, when I advise, I try to infuse a lot of this message. And I think that that's the only way that you can be integrous in this type of work.
Two of the biggest outcome, as you were just mentioning, and I concur, which is really your perspective does change. Now, that's not just psychedelics, that's meditation, that's yoga, that's mindfulness, it's chanting, whatever. There's so many different practices that would lead to the same place. And, psychedelics, there's a way in which it's certainly a shortcut, just in terms of the intensity over a short period of time. But perspective, that change is not a momentary thing. Once that happens, what happened to me it's the best way I could understand in terms of a broader discussion to have is starting with yourself. And what I had was an opening through Ram Dass when I met him as a teacher, was an opening to a doorway to trusting my own intuitive center. Right? And people can call it spirit, soul, all of that stuff. But trusting is that intuitive center is something I think everybody can relate with, because everybody's had that experience at one time or another where you just know something is right. Turn in this direction. Right?
Or the opposite.
Eh?
Or the opposite. Something is wrong.
Or something is wrong. Yeah, no, right. Yeah, absolutely.
Discernment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Discernment is crucially important. But once that happens, and there are ways to support that, and I think that's very necessary. On a day-to-day practice, on a day-to-day basis is absolutely, in my mind, necessary in order to not fall back into believing that story that you've been telling yourself about who you think you are, believing those thoughts, running from dark thoughts, etc., etc. So there has to be a support system in all of this. And anyhow, that's what we're very much going to represent and are doing so now, in the work we're doing around psychedelics and integration.
Yeah, because so when we're children, we're sponges. We hear this expression all the time. And I like to compare our minds, I guess, to a big open window when we're children, and everything can come through the window. What we see, what we experience, and that involves, like languages and just learning in school and the different influences from your family, from your parents, from your relationships, everything that you observe, it imprints on you. And then as we get older, the window kind of closes and it gets harder to make changes to things that have essentially become ingrained in us. And psychedelics reopen the window. For a fleeting moment, the window is wide open, but you are vulnerable, because just as you can have powerful insights and positive impact, you can also have the opposite. Right. And if you're not adequately supported with integration, with preparation, if you're not guided, then the opposite can happen. You can be negatively impacted. You can be traumatized, re-traumatized. You can have a change in perspective that doesn't lead to goodness. And it could be very harmful. And that's why I do think that having someone guide you, having someone with you who can help shape those moments, that fleeting moment, and make it as positively impactful for you as possible is key. And then the other thing is, people in general don't want to sit with the discomfort. We tend to run away from the feelings that make us feel nervous.
It's a wild understatement, yes.
Oh, we don't like it, and so we do things to distract ourselves from those feelings, and lessons are often uncomfortable to learn. But something about psychedelics makes us more open to the lesson, or makes the lesson land in a way that we're willing to listen to it, accept it, integrate it. We aren't fearful of the negative feelings. We realize that those negative feelings or those uncomfortable feelings are the, roots to growth. And for me, I guess my experience, my most impactful experiences were those that made me more aware of my habits that weren't necessarily serving me. And I was able to just confront it and accept it rather than deny it and flee from it or avoid it. Yeah, uh, I always thought I was self-aware, and then I tried some psychedelics and realized that I wasn't always that self-aware, and that, awareness is definitely needed. Awareness, I think, is just a key to connection too with yourself, just knowing yourself and understanding yourself. And it also leads to more acceptance of other people and more compassion for who other people are. And you realize, how to exist with other people that are different from you, people that you might want to judge at first, but you realize that you shouldn't. So a lot of lessons learned.
Certainly awareness is key. The big byword is plasticity, synaptic plasticity. And what you're speaking to, the critical period, which doesn't stick around very long, 48 hours for that, for the geese or the duck, whatever. Maybe speak to that. I mean, it's very encouraging. The reality that it can happen.
Yeah.
These habitual patterns and the crazy ass beliefs we are so stuck in around the story we tell ourselves, the thoughts we believe, all of that is potentially correctable or transformational.
Yeah.
Is a better word.
Yeah. So I don't, without getting too much into the weeds, critical periods are sort of, this umbrella description. There are a lot of mechanisms that are implicated in the establishment and closure of critical periods, and also involved in psychedelic mediated reopening of critical periods that include things like plasticity. But critical periods is more than just plasticity. It's also remodeling of the extracellular matrix, which I sort of think of as, if you've got tiles and there's a mosaic pattern in those tiles and you want to rearrange them, the first thing that you do is you take up all the grout between the tiles. So the extracellular matrix is kind of the grout between the tiles, and it's the first thing that you want to break apart and if you're going to redo those memories. So I am happy to talk about plasticity, but I just want to make sure that it's clear that the critical period idea is a little bit of a broader description than just plasticity. The other thing I want to say about plasticity is that, we have this idea, actually, William James talks about this, where, we think about plasticity as being, this great thing, and we wish we had more of it, especially as we get older and we feel stuck in our rut of habits. But we also know that too much plasticity isn't a good thing either, right? So we have some sense that failure to close critical periods or too much plasticity might be, one of the ways that autism happens. We also have ideas that when cancer cells in the brain sort of break out of their rules, one of the things they start doing is a lot of plasticity, so too much plasticity. And probably the most important for this discussion is that, too much plasticity is how drugs of abuse like cocaine and heroin and fentanyl, they induce massive amounts of plasticity, something I call hyperplasticity. Psychedelics don't seem to do that. Psychedelics are not inducing massive amounts of plasticity. Instead, what they're doing is what I call it's not my term. It's a term that's been around in neuroscience for a really long time, called meta-plasticity. And actually, I was not the first to discover that psychedelics induce meta-plasticity. That was actually Lisa Monteja and Ege Kavalala, who showed, they're at Vanderbilt, they showed that ketamine is also inducing this metaplasticity. So this metaplasticity in psychedelics is different than, say, what cocaine is doing. And the way that I like to explain that is it's sort of the difference between taking a pill and tomorrow you speak Japanese, or taking a pill and tomorrow you're able to speak any one of 7,000 possible languages, whatever you happen to be exposed to after you've taken this pill. And so cocaine is more like you take the pill and tomorrow all you know is cocaine is awesome. I love cocaine. I want to take it here, there, everywhere, right? That's sort of, you've learned the language of cocaine. Whereas what psychedelics do is metaplasticity. They restore the ability to learn. And that ability to learn is context dependent. So psychonauts have been saying for years, set and setting. As a neuroscientist, I always talk about context. And for me, this is the thing that our explanation of how psychedelics are working, our explanation covers better than any other explanation out there, right? Because what we have shown is that if you give MDMA in a social context, then it reopens the social critical period. But if you give it in an isolation context, it does not open the social critical period. And what we are testing right now is the idea that context supervises which critical period gets reopened. So if we want to open a motor critical period, then rather than giving a social context, we just give them a motor context. And this is huge because such as like we're doing it in mice and humans simultaneously. So we're training them on this very difficult for mice arm reaching task where they have to reach through this little slot and get a food pellet and bring it back to their mouths without dropping it. And after a stroke, mice have a really hard time learning that. But we're testing the idea that if we give them psychedelics, we can reopen that motor learning critical period. And if we pair that psychedelic experience with motor learning of that arm reaching task, then we can restore their arm function. And in humans, we're doing it with, psilocybin plus physical therapy instead of psychotherapy or occupational therapy instead of psychotherapy because the therapy matters, but which therapy you give really depends on which disease you're trying to cure.
But in relation to stroke in particular, obviously this is of interest because of Ram Dass and knowing what happened to him. He had a stroke. He was in a wheelchair for 22 years or so. And we definitely saw an evolvement through this process. In the beginning, he really, they really worked at it. He worked at it in terms of rehab and all of that. And it worked to some extent.
Yeah.
Because I believe he talk about plasticity. I think he had a very, very pliable brain. I mean, just the work and what he did over his lifetime really suggested that. And then at some point, physically, nothing changed. And of course, as he got older, then there was a deterioration of physically. But in his brain, in his molecules, in his hard whatever, put it all together to make up, in consciousness, absolutely, there was a lot of transformation. I mean, we saw it.
Yeah. So I would just say that typically after you have a stroke, there's about the motor critical period reopens, right? So that's just for everybody, whether you're an extraordinarily plastic person or not. Having the stroke itself reopens a critical period. And so that's why people right after the stroke have about 2 to 3 months where they're able to get some benefit from all of that occupational therapy. Then it closes. And then basically no extra amount of physical therapy really is going to change the outcome of the motor recovery after stroke. And so what we are doing in our clinical trial is looking at people who had a stroke over a year ago and then asking them, if we give them psychedelics, can we reopen that critical period and get them back to that ability to learn the way that they were when they were a child, or the way they were right after the stroke. Now, specifically about other ways to induce critical period reopening, I should also say that it's been known for decades that a reliable way to reopen critical periods is through deprivation, right? So these include things like blindfolding, et cetera. And we have shown that it's not published yet, that social deprivation can also reopen critical periods. And so what I think
meaning
is that
retreating by yourself, say?
So this is where I was going, is that we know that religious practices, mystical practices, engage in these kinds of deprivation experiments all the time, right? So living in a cave for a month, going on a silent retreat, meditation practices, all of these practices are essentially deprivation practices that we think that mystical traditions have essentially been hacking to reopen critical periods. In fact, I think that, if you were looking, the Zen Buddhists, they talk about beginner's mind. I mean, if you were looking for a neurobiological term to describe beginner's mind, reopening critical periods would be it, right? And we also know from human studies of visual blindfolding experiments that 2 weeks of blindfolding in humans, and people report mystical experiences, hallucinations, a lot of phenomenological overlap with psychedelics, which we think is, more than just a coincidence that the mechanistic overlap is there as well. So I think that what it feels like for a mouse to see God, for example, or that mystical experience is just what it feels like to reopen critical periods.
Wow. That's amazing.
And, you hear it also in the way that people describe their psychedelic experiences. Oh, it was like I was a child again. I was seeing the world, through a child's eye. Everything was beautiful in that way.